Good morning, everyone. So, this is our ML lecture 5, and today we are going to continue with the last topic that we have taken of unsupervised learning, where we have seen k-means algorithm. K-means algorithm for unsupervised learning. We have seen how does it process and how does it execute, what all are the concept, because k-means algorithm is based on the concept of clustering. So we have seen what is clustering, how can you make the clusters, and what are the concepts related to clusters, how the distances are calculated, how you do the clustering part using k-means. So this was all about the k-means algorithm based on clustering, which is a concept of unsupervised learning. So today we are just going to move forward, and we are going to see the different kind of clustering, which is called hierarchical clustering. Related to that, we'll be understanding the concept and what type of clustering algorithm should we use. We'll be having these points today. First of all, we'll see the representation of clusters, how you can represent the clusters. Then we are going to see what is hierarchical clustering. Then what are the distance functions, data standardization. Then how can we handle if we have some inputs which are of mixed attributes. Then which clustering algorithm we should use. And afterwards, we'll see the cluster evaluation, how you are going to evaluate on the basis of the quality, that what quality it is delivering. Then discovering whatever the holes or gaps are there, and the data regions. And finally, we'll move over to the summary part. So this is the objective. These are the objectives for today's presentation. So let us just quickly move forward and see what else we have to deliver here. Okay, so let's move forward. Now we see, in the last class we have seen clusters, clusterings, and based on that we have seen k-means clustering algorithm. Now we today we'll see that what are some of the various popular and common ways to represent the clusters. Now let us understand how you can represent them. See, uh, we can use the centroid of each cluster to represent the cluster. As I told you, what is a centroid? Centroid is just the center of your clusters. Whatever groups you have made of different objects, of some similar objects, reflecting some kind of similar property. For every group, I told you that we need to find out a center of that cluster. Any data which is having some kind of equal distances from all the other data, that is considered to be a center. So even with the help of a centroid, we can represent the cluster. How we can do that? We can compute the radius of that center. How we can compute the radius? As I already told you, we need to find the perimeter of the clusters that we are using. So that could be one of the possibility how we can calculate. Then after computing the radius, we need to find the standard deviation of the cluster to determine its spread in each dimension, that how much the cluster is spreading in each direction. Because see, this is not a perfect measurement where you are drawing a circle only. The cluster can be of any shape. The point is that we need to find out the exact distance of the centroid or the center from the other data lying across the boundaries of the cluster. So that you can do. Next, the centroid representation alone works well if the clusters are of the hyperspherical shape. Okay, so if your cluster is of hyperspherical shape, then the centroid is okay to be there. Then, if clusters are elongated or are of other shapes, then centroids are not sufficient. Obviously, see, centroids will only work in the case that if your if your clusters are of somewhat spherical shape or hyperspherical shape. Now, let us assume if your the clusters are not approximately related to the shapes of a spherical or circle or hyperspherical, then in that case it would be very difficult for us to find out the centroid, because the centroid is considered to be that point which is approximately, according to mathematical rule, that it has equivalent distance from all the data points. But if your the cluster is not of that spherical shape, then it would be very difficult for us to find out the equivalent distance. So this is one case that we can consider. So, using classification model, we can find out such kind of things, that all the data points in a cluster are regarded to have the same class label that we already know. Let's say the cluster ID we already have. So we run a supervised learning algorithm on the data to find a classification model, right? Now, how we can do that? See, if your X, let's say X is one of the values of your clusters, one of the data, one of the input point of your cluster, and we can identify it like that, that if the value of your cluster of your data X, let's say, if it is less than or it is equals to 2, we are going to define it in cluster number 1. As you can see here in the diagram, just see here, it is all the values are 1 1 1 1 1. So obviously, uh, if X is having value less than 2, obviously less than 2 could be 1, it could be 0, it could be in negative integer. So anything which is less than 2 will be of cluster 1. Then we have set another parameter, that if my value of X is greater than 2, in that case what I'll do is I'll put them in cluster number 2. And similarly, if my the cluster is my data point is greater than 2, but the value of y is the this y axis, if the value of y is less than equals to 1.5, then we are going to put it in this. For this, you must know what are x coordinate and y coordinate for understanding this, because we have defined the value of these coordinates also. For y, values of y greater than 1.5, it is cluster 2, and for value of y less than equals to 1.5, it is cluster number 3. So according to this scenario, even we can divide. If you don't have, see, this classification models comes into the picture when you don't have a specific shape where you can define the centroid. Now in that case, we need to make a classification model which can do such kind of things. It can divide the data points on the basis of some parameters into different clusters. So this is one of the point that we can use. Now, using of frequent values to represent the clusters. Now, this is another way. Now, this method is mainly for clustering of categorical data. Categorical data means if you are defining some kind of a categories of the data, like say the your data is not numerical one. It is not based on some kind of values. If it is category wise, like suppose if I'm predicting some kind of disease in a human body, then I can categorize them in the way like, yes, the person is diagnosed with a disease and the person is not diagnosed with a disease. So this is kind of a categorical data. So this method is suitable when we want to categorize something, or say like email spams, identifying that whether a mail is spam or not. So in such kind of thing, using the content of the text, we can identify, yes, this particular mail is of spam nature, and this particular mail is, it doesn't belong to spam. So the main method used in text clustering, where a small set of frequent words in each cluster is selected to represent the cluster, obviously. So this method is majorly used in text clustering part, where like you have seen sometimes in Facebook, in Twitter, there are some algorithms which are running, which automatically remove the tweets or remove those posts which are representing negative words. So how do we do that? We have made a different cluster of negative words. So any text which is somewhat similar to a particular cluster, like if you are saying not is a cluster. So anything related to not, either it is no, neither, nor, they are similar kind of words which are related to not. So if the algorithm sees such kind of text in your post or in your tweets, then it automatically removes that word. So this is basically text clustering. So what we can do here is we can select a specific data, select a specific word for representing a particular cluster. So this is one of the way of representing the clusters that we have. Okay. Now, next one you see is clusters of arbitrary shape. Here you can see, just see the arbitrary shapes of clusters. Now see, here, this is the major problem. You cannot find out a centroid. Like this one is a separate cluster, the C shape that you can see here. See the C shape, this a small C shape. It is a cluster. So in these particular situations, you cannot find out the centroids. Okay, it is very difficult to find out the centroids. And similarly, just see this J forming shape, J shape. You can see the bigger J shape. Again, this is even next to impossible to find out the centroid of such kind of things, right? So these are the things which make the measurement or identifying of the clusters to be very difficult. So hyperelliptical and hyperspherical clusters are usually easy to represent using their centroid together with the spreads. But the irregular shape clusters are hard to represent because see, these are the irregular shapes that I was talking about. Okay. Now, they may not be useful in some applications. Using centroids are not suitable in general, right? Like in the above figure, as I told you, the C and the J figure, it is very difficult to use centroids here. We cannot use it. So k-means clusters may be more useful for making two size shirts like you have seen here. This is somewhat making a spherical shape. So here we can find out a centroid, but in the above figure, this is very difficult. So for implementing k-means clustering algorithm, you should always implement this algorithm only then when you find the shape of the clusters to be somewhat hyperspherical or spherical or circular in nature. Only in that case it can give you efficient results. So this was all about k-means algorithm that we have seen. Now just understand what is hierarchical clustering. We are going to move in the hierarchical clustering part now. So as you can see here, this is kind of hierarchical clustering, which produces a nested sequence of clusters, like a tree, or we can say it is a dendrogram. Can you see the diagram here? This particular structure is called dendrogram. It is forming some kind of a hierarchical structure. As you can have, you already have seen a tree structure where this is a root. Then the root has it has been divided into two childs, left child and the right child. Again, that child is able to produce a further data. So this is basically a hierarchical structure that I'm seeing here. So let us first of all see what all are the types of hierarchical clustering. First of all, the hierarchical clustering, the first type of hierarchical clustering is agglomerative. That means bottom-up clustering. See, even in trees, when we have studied about trees, the trees can be designed in both the ways. If you want to have bottom-up approach, you can use them. So that will, the bottom-up approach will always begin from the leaf node, from the terminal node towards the root node. And if you want to develop your tree and design your tree in a top down manner, then in that case you'll always begin from the root node and you keep on branching it till you reach the terminal node. So these are the two types. So here we have named them as agglomerative to be the bottom up clustering and divisive to be the top down clustering. So let us just quickly understand what is agglomerative clustering. Basically, it builds the dendrogram from the bottom level. Obviously, if you are using bottom up approach, then we'll always begin from the bottom level, from the terminal level. And what does it do? It merges the most similar or nearest pair of clusters. So it will start from the, let's say it is starting from, let's say 10 datas. Okay. Now, if it finds data number 1 and 3 to be, representing some kind of similar property, so what it would do is it would merge 1 and 3 node. Then similarly, suppose 5 and 7 are representing equal or similar kind of property, then it is going to merge it up and further it will merge other trees. So this stops when all the data points are merged into a single cluster, the root cluster. Okay. So this is bottom-up approach where we'll be starting from the input level and we are merging them up to move forward to a root node. Now, the second category of clustering is divisive, that is top down. And this basically starts from the, with all the data points in one cluster, the root. We consider as a, a very big cluster, a common cluster. And then finally, what we do is we split the root into set of child cluster. And each child cluster is recursively divided further. So where do we terminate this process? We terminate this process when only single clusters of individual data points remain. That is, each clusters with only a single point remains. Only in that case we stop this type of clustering. So I hope these 2 points are clear to you, that what is agglomerative clustering and what is divisive clustering. Okay. Now let us quickly understand what is agglomerative clustering. So see, it is more popular than divisive method. Agglomerative or bottom-up approach is more common because it is very easy for us because we always have a data repository. In that data repository, whichever data are having similar kind of properties, we can easily merge them. So this one is a far better thing in comparison to divisive, because in divisive we already have a huge cluster in which we have to find out each and every data point, that whether they are performing or representing some kind of similar properties. So agglomerative is the common method or a very popular method in comparison to divisive. So at the beginning, each data point forms a cluster, which is also known as node. Then what do? We merge the nodes and the clusters that have least distance. Then we go on merging the same procedure in a recursive manner, and eventually all the nodes belong to one cluster. So this is agglomerative one, agglomerative clustering. Now see the algorithm for agglomerative clustering here. Make each data point in the data set D as a cluster. This is the first point. Then we have to compute all pairwise distances. Obviously, we need to compute the distances so as to see whichever pair has the lowest distance. They both belong to a same cluster, and we need to repeat. What do we repeat? We will find two clusters that are nearest to each other. Every time we are finding a pair which are very nearer to each other, and then we are going to merge the two clusters from a new cluster. Then every time what we are going to do is we need to compute the distance from C to all the other clusters until there is only single cluster there. So this is very simple algorithm that you can implement very easily, and you can apply clustering in that case. Okay. See here you can see working of an algorithm. Every time we find two pairs of sets P1 and P2, like these are the two data points, we are finding out that whether the distances of them are least or not, and if the distances are short, we are going to make a cluster of these. Okay, then we are making second cluster. Here P and P4 are nearer to each other, so we have made a cluster of both of them like this. Okay, then these two, this P1 and P2 cluster and this P3, P1 and P2 combinedly, they are nearer to P3 point. So we have made a third cluster of this, of P1, P2 together with P3. And similarly, after making this P3 cluster, P3 and P2 cluster are having nearer distances. So we have made again a cluster of them, that is P4. So this can be represented using a dendrogram. Here you can see. First of all, what did we do? We combined P1 and P2 because they were, having shorter distances. So we made a cluster of them and represented this node with 1. Similarly, P4 and P5, here you can see they were representing and they were in shorter distance with each other. So we have combined them, merged them to a single node, which is cluster number 2. Then cluster number 1 and P3 were having shortest distances. So we made a cluster of both of them, which concluded to cluster number 3. And then what did we do? Cluster number 3 and cluster number 2 were nearer to each other, so that is why we merged them up to find the root cluster, that is cluster number 4. So this is how agglomerative clustering works out. It starts from the data points itself, and it keeps on combining the cluster on the basis of the shorter distance, and it stops whenever you find a single root cluster. So this is the case you can see over here. This is the working of the algorithm. I hope this one is clear to all of you. Now, how can we measure the distances of the two clusters? Because the point is this, that how you are going to find that two clusters are near to each other or they are far to each other. So a few ways to measure distances of two clusters are, see, you can find a single link, you can find a complete link, you can have average link, the centroids, a lot many things are there. So single link method, we'll see how single link can be there. The distances between the two clusters is the distance between the two closest data points in the two clusters. One data point from each other, like see here. Okay, single link means that you know the data point. Let's say this is the closest one. So, or let's say this is the closest one. This cluster of the data point in this cluster is closest to this cluster. So we need to find out for both the clusters those two data points each of every cluster which are having lowest distances. So on the basis of those single links, why we are calling them single links? Because a single data point from every cluster will be taken up in this linking. We are not seeking other data points. A single data point from each cluster will be taken up, which is having shorter distance. So we can take this up. Then it can find arbitrarily shaped clusters, but it may cause the undesirable chain effect by noisy points. So two natural clusters are split into two. This is the point. Then complete link method. What is complete link method? The distance between the two clusters is the distance of the two farthest data points in the two clusters. So complete link method, what do we do? Instead of finding out the nearest data points of two different clusters, we find out the farthest data points in the two clusters. This is just the opposite of the single link method that we can use. But the con in this is the demerit is that it is very sensitive to outliers because they are far away. As you can see here, they are very far away from each other, right? This is the point. Then what is average link? Basically, a compromise between the sensitivity of the complete link clusterings to the outliers and the tendency of single link clustering to form long chains that do not, correspond to the intuitive notion of clusters as compact and spherical objects. So in this method, the distance between two clusters is the average distance of all pairwise distances between the data points in the two clusters. Obviously, average link means that the data points of both the clusters will be taken up and their distances will be averaged up. So this will give you an average link. And then we have centroid method. In centroid method, what do we do in this method? The distance between the two clusters, the distance between their centroids. So even this point can be taken up. This is the common method, but this applies only where the clusters are, representing a shape which is a spherical or circular in nature. Only in that case you can use centroid method. Otherwise, centroid method is not successful in every scenario because the shape may be deformed in that case. Now, if we talk about the complexity of such kind of algorithms, it is actually n square. Huh? The n is the number of data points. So single link can be done in big O of n square. Complete and average link can be done in O n square log n. So if you see, complete and average links are more efficient in comparison to single link methods because you can see the difference in the complexity. One is representing polynomial kind of complexity, and another one is giving logarithmic complexity. So obviously in data structures you have studied and this concept that the logarithmic complexity is considered to be very good in comparison to a linear or a polynomial complexity. So due to complexity, it is hard to use for large data sets. So if you have small data set, then only use such kind of things. Okay. Then we are going to see next is the distance functions. So what are the distance functions here? See, the key to clustering is basically the similarity of the data points or the dissimilarity of the data points which data point represent, right? So there are numerous distance functions. There are different types of data: numeric data, nominal data, and we have different specific applications. On the basis of that, we find out the distance functions. Ah, So, see the next point. So most commonly, the distance functions that we use here are the Euclidean distance and the Manhattan distance, and we denote the distances with distance xi and xj. Xi is the first data point, and xj is the second data point in which we are finding out the distance. Where xi and xj are the vectors. There are special cases of Minkowski distance h, which is a positive integer. So how do we find out? This is the case. This is a formula given for finding out the distance. You can use it whenever you want to find the distance using clustering algorithms. Then Euclidean distance and Manhattan distance. Here you can see if h is equals to 2, it is the Euclidean distance, and if your h is equals to 1, then it is Manhattan distance. Here we have seen the formula. I'll just again tell you, this is h here. Just see the degree of every distance is h. So if this h is equals to 2, you count it or you calculate it with the Euclidean distance, because Euclidean distance is mean squared error. Mean squared means you are squaring the distances, the differences of the distances. So here it is h is equals to 2 is Euclidean, and if you take h is equals to 1, that will be considered as Manhattan distance. See the Manhattan distance, and this is weighted Euclidean distance, as you can see from here. Okay. So this is squared Euclidean distance to place progressively greater weights on the data points that are farther apart. And then we have Chebyshev distance. One wants to define two data points as different if they are different on any one of the attributes. So these are the points for Chebyshev distances. Now, what are the distances functions for binary and nominal attributes? Now, in case if you are, these were the points, the last that we have seen were the functions for numerical values, numerical attributes. But if you are having the if you want to find out the distance functions for binary and nominal attributes, then see, the binary attributes has two values or states, but no ordering relationship, like gender. If we have two binary attributes, male and female, right? Similarly, if we find out some kind of answers to the options like yes or no, so these can be two binary attributes. So a binary attribute can have only maximum two values. It could be 0, 1, it could be yes, no, it could be male, female, it could be spam mail or not spam mail. So this is a binary attribute. Now for this kind of thing, we use a confusion matrix. You might have heard about this in data mining also. We have seen that what is a confusion matrix. So we use a confusion matrix to introduce the distance functions and measure. Now let the ith and the jth data points be xi and xj, the vectors from which we are finding out the distances. Then this is the confusion matrix that we have created. So if you have two values, we are going to take it as the row and the column as such, and here are the values. So here if you see a, the a is the number of attributes with the value of 1 for both the data points. Then for b here, for b, the number of attributes for xi is 1 and for xif is 0. And similarly for C, it is xif is 0 and xif is 1. And the number of attributes with the value of 0 for both the data points is d. Here d will represent 0 to both the data points. Okay. So this is kind of confusion matrix. Now symmetric binary attributes. See, a binary attribute is symmetric if both of its states, 0 and 1, have equal importance and they carry the same weights. Example, male and female of the attribute gender. Now, what is distance function? Simple matching coefficient. Now, proportion of mismatches of their values. Distance of xi and xj, which is given by b plus c, is equals to a plus b plus c plus d. Now, all these coefficients that you are seeing, b and c, these are of confusion matrix that we have seen later here. Let's see. This is a, b, c, d. So here, what we are doing is we are taking these ABCD, whatever values you have got, you are going to add them and divide them as the denominator. So this can be used up. This is the example. That's it. So this is kind of a confusion matrix that we have created. So according to the formula, if you add up all the things, you get it like this. So distance came out to be 0.42. Okay, this is how we get it. To see the formula here, p plus c divided by a plus b plus c plus d. So plus c, b plus c is 2 plus 1. So b is 2 and c is 1. Then a is 2 and b is 2. So we do so, get 3 divided by 7, which is 0.42. Now, we have seen asymmetric binary function. Now we have seen asymmetric binary function. What is that? See, if one of the state is more important or more valuable than the other, then we use asymmetric binary attributes. Now, by convention, state one represent the more important state. Even in binary logic that we have seen, 0 and 1. If you have 0 and 1 value, 1 is considered to be on state and 0 is considered to be off state. So 1 is got the higher priority. So it is a typical and a rare infrequent state. Now in that case, what do? We use Jacquard coefficient instead of using this simple matching coefficient. Here you have seen simple matching coefficient. So whenever you are using symmetric binary attribute where 0 and 1, the two states that you are using are of equal importance, then we use simple matching coefficient. But in a case when it is asymmetric in nature, then in that case we use Jacquard coefficient, right? So in Jacquard coefficient, the formula just differs by the d coefficient, where you don't find the denominator, the d point to be the denominator of this ABC part. So this is the case of asymmetric binary values. Then we have normal attributes. More than two states or values, the commonly used distance measure is also based on simple matching method. So given two data points, xi and xj, let the number of attributes be r and the number of values that match in xi and xj be q. So the distance is given by r minus q divided by r. So in that way, you can find out the distances in the nominal attributes. So what do we do? How do we find out the distance function for the text documents? These were the distances, the numerical distances when you have numerical data. But when we talk about the text part, how do you calculate the distances? So see, a document consists of a sequence of sentences, and each sentence consists of a sequence of words. Now to simplify it, we can say that a document is usually considered a bag of words in document clustering. Sequence and position of words are basically ignored. So a document is represented with a vector just like a normal data point. So it is common to use similarity to compare two documents rather than the distances. So the most common used similarity function is the cosine similarity. And let us just see what is this cosine similarity here. So now we are going to see the data standardization. So in Euclidean space, standardization of the attributes is recommended so that all the attributes can have equal impact on the computation of the distances. So consider the following pair of data points like xi is 0.1 and 20 and xj is 0.9 and 720. So to calculate this, what do? We do 0.9. This first part 0.9 minus 0.1 and square of it, because we are taking Euclidean distance, and Euclidean distance is nothing but the mean squared values. So this is what we are taking. Then again 720 minus 20, and we take the square of it. So we get 700. So the distance is almost completely dominated by this. As you can see here, one is dominating. It is very much. It is too large, and one distance you can see it is just in fractional values, just in points. So standardized attributes are the ones which are they are forced attributes to have a common value range. Now we have nominal attributes. Now sometimes we need to transform, nominal attributes to numerical attributes. Now this transformation of nominal attributes to binary attributes also. So what do we do? The number of values of a nominal attribute is v. Then we create v binary attributes to represent them. Then, if a data instance for nominal attribute takes a particular value, then the value of its binary attribute is set to 1, otherwise it is set to 0. So the resulting binary attributes can be used as numeric attributes with two values, that is one is 0 and one is 1, right? Then see, the nominal attribute is fruit. It has three values. The fruit can be apple, orange, and pear. Now, what do? We create three binary attributes called apple, orange, pear in the new data. Now, if a particular data instance in the original data has apple as the value for the fruit, then what do? Then in the transform data, we set the value of the attribute apple to be 1 and rest all the attributes to be 0. So the value of orange and pear sets to be 0. So whichever is coming, we can mark them as 1, others to be 0. So this will, what does it do? It will convert the nominal attribute into some kind of binary attributes where only two values can be assigned, either 1 if a particular data is existing and 0 if the particular data is not existing. Now, what are ordinal attributes? It is like a nominal attribute, but its values have a numerical ordering. Like age attributes with value, like young, middle age, and old, they are ordered. Similarly, common approach of standardization treat is as an interval scaled attribute. We can take it as like that. Now, what it does mean by handling mixed attributes? Let's say. So see, our distance functions given are for data with all numerical attributes or all nominal attributes. Now, practically, जो data है that has different types. Like it can have interval scale data. It could be symmetric binary. It could be asymmetric binary. It can be ratio scaled, ordinal, nominal. So these are the six type of attributes which your data can have. Okay. Now, one common way of dealing with such kind of mixed attributes is you need to decide the dominant attribute type and convert the other types to its type, right? Now, example, if most attributes in the data set are interval scaled, so what do? We convert all the other attributes like ordinal, ratio scaled to interval scaled attributes. So it is also appropriate to treat symmetric binary attributes as interval scaled attributes, right? So it does not make much sense to convert a nominal attribute to asymmetric binary attribute to an interval scale attribute, but it is still frequently done in practice by assigning some numbers to them according to the some hidden ordering prices of the food. So alternatively, a nominal attribute can be converted to a set of binary attributes which are then treated as a nominal attribute. Then combining individual distances, you can combine different distances and approach to compute individual attribute. Even this can be used. Now let us just see which clustering algorithm should you use. So how to choose a clustering algorithm? See, clustering research has a long history. A vast collection of algorithms are available. We only introduce several main algorithms, like choosing the best algorithm is a challenge. So every algorithm has its limitation and it works well with a certain data distribution, and it is very hard, if not impossible, to know what distribution the application data follow. So the data may not be fully follow any ideal structure or distribution required by the algorithm. So one also needs to decide how to standardize the data or to choose a suitable distance function and to select other parameter values. Due to this complexity, the common practice is to run several algorithms using different distance functions and parameter settings, and then carefully analyze the compared results. The interpretation of the results must be based on insight into meaning of the original data together with the knowledge of the algorithms used. So clustering is highly application dependent, and to certain extent it is subjective in nature, which depends on the personal preferences, right? Now let us see what how do we evaluate the clusters we have made. So the quality of the clustering is very hard to evaluate because we do not know the correct clusters, but still after then we can use some methods which are of based on the user inspection. So you can study centroids and its spread. You can use rules from the decision tree, whatever the rules are there for decision tree, even you can apply them if you are using hierarchical clustering methods. Now for text documents, one can read some documents in the clusters and see whether it is representing the correct conclusion or not. Then we can use label data for classification, where assumption could be that each class can be taken up as a cluster. And after clustering, a confusion matrix is constructed. From the matrix, we compute. So various matrices like on the basis of entropy, purity, precision, recall, and F score. So intra-cluster cohesion can also be used for evaluation, where cohesion measures how near the data point in a cluster are to the cluster centroid. And sum of squared errors, SSE, which we commonly know, it can be used for the measurement. Then we can use inter-cluster separation, which is called isolation. This separation means that a different cluster centroid should be far away from one another. Now, in most application, expert judgments are the still the keys where we can find out. Now we can do indirect evaluation also. In some application, clustering is not the primary task but used to help perform another task. So we can use the performance on the primary task to compare the clustering methods. Now for instance, in an application, the primary task is to provide recommendations on book purchasing for online shoppers. So if we can cluster books according to their features, we might be able to provide better recommendations. We can evaluate different clustering algorithms based on the how well they help with the recommendation task. Here we assume that the recommendation can be reliably evaluated. Finally, discovering holes and data regions. So all the clustering algorithms only group data. Clusters only represent one aspect of the knowledge in the data, and another aspect that we have not studied is the holes. So a hole is considered to be a region in the data space that contains no or few data points. What is the reason? That insufficient data is certain areas and certain attribute value combinations are possible, which seldom occurs. Although clusters are important, holes in the space can be quite useful too. Now, for example, in disease database, we may find the certain symptoms or test values do not occur together. When a certain medicine is used, some test values never go beyond certain ranges. So these can be used. Okay. Then, given a data space, separate data regions, empty data regions can be find out, and use a supervised learning technique, that is decision tree induction, to separate the two types of region. We can, data region and empty region can be taken up using this. Now, due to the use of supervised learning method for an unsupervised learning task, an interesting connection is made between the two types of learning paradigms. So let us just quickly see about the summary. So, in summarized way, we can say that clustering is has long history and still active it is. There are huge number of clustering algorithms that we can choose to apply and implement. More are still coming in every year. Now we only introduce several main algorithms. There are main others example like density-based algorithms, subspace clustering, scale-up methods, etc. Now clustering is hard to evaluate but very useful in practice. So this partially explains why there are still a large number of clustering algorithms being devised every year. So clustering is highly application dependent and to some extent it is subjective in nature too. So this is all about the clustering part of unsupervised learning. I hope the lecture will be clear to you. So let us just quickly skip to the part of MCQ and let us just see what do we have. So now I'm going to give you the MCQ part. We have seen all the clustering methods, and I hope you all will be able to identify the clusters and you all will be able to answer the questions related to clustering. So let us just quickly, I'm just going to share some MCQs with you. Please go through it and see. Let us just see question number one here. The goal of clustering a set of data is to. So you better know the answer. It's very easy. It is very basic question. Then see question number two. The K-means algorithm. It always converges, to a clustering that minimizes. It is wisely used in practice or all blah blah whatever it is. Then the choice of K, the number of clusters to partition a set of data into. आप कैसे ले सकते हैं इसको? It is a personal choice, or it should always be as large as your computer system can handle, or it depends on why you are clustering the data, or it could be maximum 10. So I've told you this key point also. It is easy, you can quickly select the correct answer. Then which of the following statements about K-means algorithm are correct? It is sensitive to outliers. Centroids of this algorithm may not be any observed data points. K-means algorithm can detect non-convex clusters. Then this is question number 5. Quickly see. These are the points given to you, and you need to find out the Euclidean distance. On the basis of it, you can find out. Let us just quickly see question number 7. If you want to find out the Euclidean distance between the values given, these are the values. I hope this is visible to all of you. It is 4.9, 3.0, 1.4, 0.2, 5.6, 2.5, 3.9, and 1.1. So it is very easy. You can find out the Euclidean distance, which is the mean squared values. And quickly see question number 8. Which of the following statements are true? I hope question number 8 is clear to you, and it is very easy. We have seen all the points here. Then let us just quickly see question number 9. Which of the following statements are true? Clustering analysis is unsupervised. Since it does not require label training data, then it has a wide range of application. This is the question number 10. What are some common considerations and requirements for cluster analysis? Let us see. This is very easy. What are the two types of hierarchical clustering? Bottom up, top down, dendrogram. So this was all about the clustering methods in unsupervised learning. And I hope this is already clear to you that what exactly is a unsupervised learning algorithm in machine learning. and how clustering is considered to be, one of the strongest method of unsupervised learning, and how different clustering algorithms can be applied to it. In that, we have seen a separate kind of clustering method which is called hierarchical clustering. Also, we have seen two different types: the divisive method and the agglomerative kind of clustering. So all these things we have done, how we can evaluate the clusters, how we can improvise the result. So I hope all the things will be clear to you, and in case if you have doubt, you can ask in the question. You can see again, see the slides that we have considered, and I hope everything is clear to you. MCQs were easy to answer if you, calmly, and if you focus on what the things are explained. So I hope everything is clear. Thank you so much. And tomorrow we'll begin from another set of different kind of machine learning algorithm, which is semi-supervised learning. So in tomorrow's lecture, we'll cover up semi-supervised learning. Thank you so much.
Hi, mummy. अब किसके